I never imagined my life would take such a turn. Sometimes, I think back to those early days with David and wonder where it all went wrong. My name is Angela, and I want to share my story, one of love, trust, and betrayal. It all started when I was in my mid-20s, juggling college and part-time jobs in Austin, Texas. My life was a balancing act, but I was determined to stay independent. I had always prided myself on working hard and never relying on anyone else, especially not for financial support. Then came David, who was a few years older than me. We met during a college event, and despite our age difference and my busy schedule, there was something about him that caught my attention. David seemed stable and had a good career, qualities I admired. We quickly became inseparable. David and I fell in love. It felt like a fairy tale at first. We navigated our way through our differences and made it work. I bought him thoughtful gifts on special occasions, like a beautiful leather wallet for his birthday, but never asked him for anything in return. My independence was a cornerstone of our relationship. I wanted him to see me for who I was and not just as someone who could be swayed by material things. But as we grew closer, David's insecurities began to surface, and they were deeply rooted in his relationship with his parents, Robert and Linda. They had recently won the lottery, a windfall that changed their lives dramatically. Their sudden wealth led them to buy a $450,000 house and adopt a sense of superiority that made them look down on everyone else. They began to see people through a filter of distrust and suspicion, particularly when it came to their son. I first met Robert and Linda at their new, opulent home. They welcomed me with forced smiles and superficial politeness. It was clear from the start that they didn't like me. Their doubts about my intentions were palpable. They had this way of questioning my sincerity, as if every word I said was measured against a backdrop of financial motives. Despite my best efforts to show them that I was genuine, I could see that their skepticism was a barrier I couldn't easily break through. David tried to brush off his parents' concerns, but I could sense the tension growing. He would sometimes echo their doubts in subtle ways, and I felt the sting of their mistrust. It was hard to watch someone you love struggle with their own beliefs, especially when those beliefs were shaped by others. Despite my growing concerns, I chose to be patient and hoped that, over time, they would see my true intentions. The first major crack in our relationship appeared on David's birthday. I had been planning the perfect gift, a high-end camera that David had been eyeing for months. I saved up for it and was excited to see his reaction. When the day arrived, I hoped this gesture would show him how much I cared. We went over to his parents' house to celebrate. David eagerly showed off the camera to Robert and Linda, hoping for their approval. But instead of delight, their reaction was cold and accusatory. They didn't even try to hide their disdain. "Oh, how convenient," Robert said with a smirk. "Just what David needs, another expensive toy." Linda chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's amazing how generous you can be when it's someone else's money, isn't it?" David's face fell. I looked at him, hoping he would step in and defend me. Instead, he fell silent, his eyes cast downward. His hesitation was like a knife to my heart. In that moment, I felt completely alone, exposed to the very people who were supposed to support us. The silence that followed was suffocating. David's parents continued their barrage of insinuations, and David sat there, a passive participant in their cruel game. The joy I had hoped to share with him was replaced by a heavy, painful silence. The hurt was not just from their words, but from David's unwillingness to stand up for me. As I left that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The seed of doubt planted by David's parents had taken root, and I was beginning to see the consequences of their toxic influence on our relationship. What started as subtle mistrust had now become an open, festering wound. The question was no longer just about whether David loved me, but whether he could truly trust me despite the poison planted in his mind. This was just the beginning, and I had no idea how deep the rift would grow or how it would all play out. All I knew was that the trust one thought we had built was now hanging by a thread, and the future of our relationship seemed increasingly uncertain. The cracks in our relationship grew wider with each passing day. I kept hoping that time would heal the wounds and that David would come to see how much I loved him, despite the shadows cast by his parents. But instead, things only seemed to get worse. David's birthday had been a turning point, but I didn't realize just how significant until a few weeks later. The tension in our home was palpable. David was more withdrawn, and the once simple joy of being together was now clouded by unspoken doubts and arguments. It was clear that the influence of his parents was taking a serious toll on our relationship. One evening, as we were sitting on the couch after dinner, David finally spoke up about what had been bothering him. "Angela, do you really understand what my parents are saying about you?" he asked, his voice heavy with uncertainty. I looked at him, my heart sinking. "David, I've heard what they've said. It's hurtful and unfair, but I thought we were stronger than this. I thought you knew me better." He shook his head. "It's not just about what they say. It's what I've been feeling. They keep suggesting that you're with me for my money. And I don't know if I can ignore it anymore." I felt a lump in my throat. "David, I've worked hard to show you that I'm here for you, not your money. But if you're starting to believe what they say, then where does that leave us?" The conversation ended in tears, with David retreating to his side of the bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The love that once seemed so certain was now shrouded in doubt and mistrust. I wanted to fight for us, but it felt like I was fighting against David's own insecurities and his parents' relentless negativity. The next major event was David's birthday party, which I had hoped would be a fresh start. I bought him an expensive camera, something he had always wanted. I thought it would be a perfect gift to show him how much I cared and to mend the rift that had formed. We planned a small celebration at his parents' house, and I was determined to make it a special occasion. When we arrived at Robert and Linda's lavish home, I tried to stay positive, hoping that this gift might shift their perception. David was visibly excited as he unwrapped the camera and eagerly showed it to his parents. I watched as their faces lit up with forced smiles, but it quickly became clear that the joy was superficial. Robert took one look at the camera and scoffed. "Another high-end gadget. Must be nice to have so much disposable income." Linda's comment was even more cutting. "It's always interesting to see what people will do for a little bit of attention." David, rather than defending me, stood silently. His eyes were downcast, his silence almost an endorsement of his parents' harsh words. I could feel the sting of their accusations, and their words felt like a direct assault on my character. The evening ended on a sour note, with David and me leaving the party in silence. I could sense the deepening divide between us, and it was clear that the mistrust had taken root. The hurt and disappointment I felt were overwhelming, and I began to question whether there was any way to repair the damage. The following days were filled with tension and unspoken words. David's behavior became more distant, and the love that once felt so genuine now seemed overshadowed by a thick fog of doubt. It was heartbreaking to realize that the person I thought I knew and loved was now questioning my intentions. I started to think about what I could do to address the situation. I needed to find a way to confront the doubts and accusations head-on. The idea of a dramatic gesture took shape in my mind. I wanted to prove to David and his parents that I had nothing to hide and that my love for David was genuine. So, I made a plan. I decided to invite David and his parents to a special place, one that would make them see just how wrong their suspicions were. I knew that this confrontation would be crucial in deciding our future, and I hoped it would finally bring the clarity we needed. As I prepared for this confrontation, I felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. I knew it was a gamble, but I also knew that I couldn't continue in a relationship where trust was perpetually in question. The coming days would be pivotal, and I was determined to face whatever came next with courage and honesty. The day of the confrontation arrived, and I was both nervous and resolute. I had meticulously planned everything, hoping that this would be the turning point where David and his parents would finally see the truth. I had invited them to a luxurious estate that had belonged to my late parents. It was a grand house worth $4 million, held in a trust fund that I would inherit when I turned 32. I hoped this would demonstrate that my love for David wasn't about his money, but about him as a person. When David, Robert, and Linda arrived at the estate, their expressions were a mix of curiosity and skepticism. I greeted them warmly, trying to keep my nerves in check. We went through the grand entrance, past the marble floors and opulent decorations, and into the living room where I had set up refreshments. David's eyes widened as he took in the grandeur of the house. "Angela, this place is incredible," he said, though his tone was laced with unease. Robert and Linda exchanged glances, their expressions hard to read. "It's certainly impressive," Robert said, his voice betraying a hint of suspicion. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "There's a reason I wanted to show you all this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want you to understand that my feelings for David have never been about money." Linda raised an eyebrow. "And what does this house have to do with that?" I led them to the study, where I had set up a few documents and pictures. "This house is part of an inheritance from my parents. It's held in a trust fund, and I will fully inherit it when I turn 32. I wanted to share this with you to show that I have never needed David's money or anyone else's. My love for him is genuine." The room fell silent as they processed the information. I could see the confusion on their faces, and for a moment, I hoped they might understand. David, on the other hand, looked conflicted. He seemed torn between his parents' lingering doubts and the evidence I was presenting. Robert was the first to speak, his voice softer than before. "Angela, I didn't realize this was part of your background, but it still doesn't change how we've seen things." Linda nodded in agreement. "We've been worried about David's well-being, and maybe we were too quick to judge." David looked at me, his eyes searching for answers. "Angela, I never meant to doubt you, but their opinions have weighed heavily on me. I see now that you have your own successes and don't need anything from me." I felt a pang of sadness mixed with hope. "David, I've tried to show you that my love for you is real. But if you're still having doubts, we need to address them directly." The tension in the room was palpable as we continued to talk. Robert and Linda seemed to struggle with accepting that their views might have been misguided, while David was grappling with the realization that his parents' influence had clouded his judgment. As the conversation progressed, it became clear that the damage done by the mistrust was significant. Despite the apologies and attempts to reconcile, I felt a growing sense of resignation. I had hoped this revelation would heal the rift, but instead, it exposed the deep-seated issues that had plagued our relationship. David tried to bridge the gap, but his attempts felt too little, too late. The trust that had been eroded over time couldn't be easily restored, and the hurt from the ongoing doubts was too fresh. I realized that no matter how sincere David's intentions were, the foundation of our relationship had been fundamentally damaged. The evening ended with an uneasy truce. David, Robert, and Linda left the estate with their own thoughts, and I was left alone to reflect on what had transpired. The confrontation had brought some clarity, but also reinforced the painful truth that our relationship was at a breaking point. As I prepared to move forward, I knew that the next steps would be crucial. I had to decide whether to continue fighting for a relationship marred by mistrust or to take a stand for my own self-respect and independence. The choices I faced were daunting, but I was determined to find a path that honored my own values and feelings. The days following the revelation at the estate were filled with turmoil. David's attempts to reconcile were earnest, but the damage done was beyond repair. I couldn't ignore the harsh reality that had unfolded. The seeds of mistrust, once sown, had grown into an insurmountable barrier between us. One evening, as I was packing up some of my things in our apartment, David came to talk. His face was lined with worry, and his voice trembled with the weight of his emotions. "Angela, please, can we talk?" he asked, his eyes pleading. I nodded, setting down the box I was packing. "What is it, David?" "I know I made mistakes," he began, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't stand up for you like I should have. I let my parents' opinions cloud my judgment, and I'm truly sorry for that." I sighed, feeling a mix of sadness and frustration. "David, it's too late for apologies. The trust between us was shattered long before this revelation. I needed you to believe in me, not just to hear me, but to actually trust me." David's shoulders slumped. "I understand that now. I see the damage that's been done. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, if you'll give me a chance." I looked around the apartment, filled with memories and broken dreams. "David, it's not just about fixing things with apologies or promises. It's about the fundamental issues that have been festering for too long." He reached out for my hand, but I pulled away gently. "I've thought a lot about what's best for both of us. Staying in a relationship where I constantly have to prove my worth isn't healthy for either of us. I need to move on and rebuild my life." David's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't do this, Angela. I love you. I'm willing to change." I shook my head, my resolve firm. Love isn't enough when trust is broken beyond repair. I need to focus on myself now. I've made up my mind. That evening, I began the process of moving out. It was heart-wrenching, leaving behind the life I had envisioned with David. But I knew it was necessary. I filed for divorce the next week, and though it was painful, it was also a relief to take control of my own future. The following year was a journey of self-discovery and healing. I immersed myself in my work and personal interests, finding solace in new routines and activities. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, slowly rebuilding the confidence that had been eroded by the relationship. David and his parents faced their own struggles in the wake of our separation. The legal and financial repercussions of the divorce were challenging, and the family dynamic was forever altered. I heard through mutual acquaintances that David was trying to make amends, but I had moved on, focused on my own path. Eventually, I found a sense of peace and stability. My independence became a source of strength, and I realized that I could thrive on my own. The lessons I learned about trust, self-respect, and the impact of external influences were invaluable. They shaped my understanding of what a healthy relationship should be and reinforced the importance of believing in myself. As I look back on my journey, I am grateful for the clarity that came from the painful experiences. I've learned that true love must be built on mutual respect and trust, not on the shaky ground of doubt and mistrust. The end of my relationship with David was not an easy choice, but it was the right one for me. Now, I embrace the future with hope and determination. The scars of the past will always be a part of me, but they no longer define me. I've found a renewed sense of purpose and am ready to face whatever comes next, confident in my ability to navigate life on my own terms.